What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you've been following Game of Thrones news, you know that HBO is bringing us something truly special in January 2026. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms premieres on January 18th, adapting George R.R. Martin's beloved Tales of Dunk and Egg novellas. This isn't your typical Game of Thrones spin-off filled with dragons and massive battles for the Iron Throne. Instead, we're getting an intimate, character-driven story about a simple Hedge Knight and his mysterious squire traveling through Westeros about a century before the events we witnessed in Game of Thrones. The first season adapts the Hedge Knight, which takes place in 209 AC during the Tourney at Ashford Meadow. George R.R. Martin himself has declared that Episode 5, featuring the Trial of Seven, is the most dramatic thing he's ever written. And believe me, after decades of analyzing these stories, I can tell you why that scene and 9 others are absolutely essential to making this adaptation work. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of Westeros. Let's get started. Our first essential scene is the death and burial of Ser Arlan of Pennytree. This moment defines everything that follows in Duncan's journey. In the opening of the Hedge Knight, we find young Duncan, probably 16 or 17 years old, digging a grave for the only father figure he's ever known. Ser Arlan was a Hedge Knight, one of those wandering mercenary knights who travels from Tourney to Tourney, taking whatever work he can find. He found Duncan in Flea Bottom, the poorest slum in King's Landing, and took him on as a squire. What makes this scene so powerful is what it reveals about Duncan's character through his actions during those final moments with his master. Duncan inherited everything Ser Arlan owned: his horses, Chestnut, Sweetfoot, and Thunder, his armor, his sword, and most importantly, his lessons about what it means to be a true knight. The novella strongly suggests that Ser Arlan died before he could formally knight Duncan, which means our hero is essentially claiming a title he might not technically deserve. But Duncan believes in the ideal of knighthood that Arlan taught him, that a true knight defends the innocent and upholds justice regardless of personal cost. HBO's trailer already confirms they're showing this scene, and that's exactly right. We need to see Duncan carrying Ser Arlan's body, digging that grave with his own hands, and then making the decision to take up his master's sword and armor. This is Duncan's origin story, the moment he transforms from a nameless boy from Flea Bottom into Sir Duncan the Tall. The scene establishes the themes of honor, identity, and social class that will drive the entire story. Without understanding Duncan's humble beginnings and his deep respect for the man who raised him, we can't fully appreciate the courage it takes for him to enter a world of lords and princes where he absolutely doesn't belong. Next up is Duncan's first meeting with Egg at the inn. This scene is pure magic because it introduces us to one half of the greatest friendship in Westerosa history while keeping us completely in the dark about who this mysterious bald boy really is. Duncan stops at an inn on his way to Ashford Meadow, and there he encounters a peculiar stable boy with a shaved head and striking indigo eyes. The boy is bold, impertinent even, immediately asking Duncan to take him on as a squire. What's brilliant about this scene is how Martin plants clues about Egg's true identity while making it seem natural that Duncan would assume he's just some innkeeper's son or a street urchin from King's Landing. Egg demonstrates surprising knowledge about horses and knightly equipment. He's well-spoken and educated in ways that don't quite match his supposed station. But Duncan, coming from poverty himself, doesn't question these inconsistencies. He sees a bald boy in simple clothes and assumes he understands exactly what he's looking at. The dynamic between them establishes itself immediately. Egg is clever, resourceful, and persistent. He doesn't ask permission, he simply shows up at Duncan's camp later, having already washed his clothes and prepared everything. Duncan is simultaneously annoyed and impressed. He needs help, and Egg clearly knows what he's doing, even if Duncan suspects the boy might be fleeing from some trouble back home. HBO needs to nail the chemistry between Peter Claffey and Dexter Saul Ansell in this scene. Their banter must feel natural, with Egg showing just enough worldliness to make book readers smile knowingly while new viewers remain blissfully unaware. This is where we fall in love with both characters, Duncan's earnest simplicity and Egg's hidden depths. The show must resist the temptation to make Egg's identity too obvious too soon. The reveal works because Duncan genuinely doesn't see it coming, and neither should the audience unfamiliar with the source material. Scene number 3 takes us to the iconic moment where Duncan and Egg camp beneath the elm tree and witness the shooting star. This is one of the most visually memorable scenes from the entire novella, and it's absolutely essential because it creates Duncan's personal sigil, the symbol that will represent him for the rest of his life and eventually connect him to Brienne of Tarth centuries later. Duncan makes camp by a stream near Ashford Meadow under a massive elm tree because he can't afford a proper pavilion like the noble knights. It's a moment of quiet humility that reminds him and us just how far he is from belonging in this world of lords and tournaments. But then something magical happens. As Duncan and Egg sit beneath that elm tree, a bright green shooting star streaks across the evening sky. Duncan, despite all his hardships, sees it as a lucky sign. This moment becomes deeply significant when Duncan later needs to paint a new sigil on his shield. He can't continue using Ser Arlan's winged chalice because he wasn't Arlan's true-born son. The sunset field represents Ser Arlan's love of sunsets, a touching tribute to his mentor. The elm tree grounds the symbol in this specific moment and place, while the shooting star above represents hope, luck, and Duncan's dreams of becoming something greater than his origins suggest he should be. The HBO trailer has already shown us this scene, and it looks absolutely perfect. The elm tree is magnificent, and we can see Duncan and Egg sitting together in that quiet moment of companionship. This scene needs the right cinematography, the evening light filtering through the elm's branches, the sudden brightness of the falling star, and Duncan's face registering wonder rather than cynicism. It's a rare moment of pure magic in a story that's otherwise grounded in the gritty reality of medieval life. The shooting star and elm tree will appear on Duncan's shield throughout the series, becoming his personal coat of arms and a constant reminder of this moment when he dared to dream. Our fourth essential scene brings us to one of the most charming character introductions in all of Martin's work. Duncan meeting Tanselle the Tall and the painting of his shield. Tanselle is a Dornish puppeteer performing at the Tourney grounds, tall for a woman, only a head or so shorter than the towering Duncan himself. She's talented, beautiful, and possesses an easy confidence that completely disarms our awkward Hedge Knight. Duncan needs someone to paint over Ser Arlan's sigil on his shield, and Egg suggests approaching Tanselle, who has demonstrated her artistic skills with the elaborate puppets her troupe uses in their performances. The interaction between Duncan and Tanselle crackles with romantic tension, though both are too shy or uncertain to act on it. When Duncan describes what he wants for his sigil, Tanselle understands immediately. She sees the poetry in his choice, the elm and shooting star, and promises to paint it that very night. What makes this scene so important beyond the obvious romantic element is what it represents thematically. Tanselle is an artist, a creative person in a world dominated by warriors and lords. She sees Duncan not as a suspicious stranger or a low-born hedge knight, but as someone worthy of her time and talent. She recognizes something noble in him that has nothing to do with birth or titles. Their flirtation is sweet and innocent, Duncan blushing and stumbling over his words, while Tanselle laughs at his awkwardness in a way that feels affectionate rather than mocking. HBO has cast Tamsin Crawford as Tanselle, and the trailer gives us glimpses of her and her troupe's magnificent dragon puppet. The chemistry between Crawford and Claffey will be crucial because Tanselle haunts Duncan's thoughts for years afterward. This is Duncan's first real romantic connection, and it needs to feel genuine and poignant. The scene where she hands him the completed shield, painted with his elm and shooting star on a sunset field, should be a moment of quiet intimacy. This shield becomes Duncan's most treasured possession, and centuries later, it will hang in the armory of Brienne's family at Tarth, suggesting a connection between these two champions of true knighthood that transcends time. Scene 5 is where everything changes. Prince Aerion's assault on Tanselle and the puppeteers. This is the inciting incident that transforms a simple tournament story into something far more significant. Prince Aerion Targaryen, called Aerion Bright Flame, is one of the most vicious and sadistic characters in Westerosi history. On the first night of the tourney, he watches the puppeteers perform a show featuring a dragon being slain, and his madness interprets this as treason against House Targaryen. Aerion storms the puppet show with his guards, destroying the stage and attacking the performers. When Egg runs to get Duncan, our Hedge Knight arrives to find Aerion breaking Tanselle's fingers one by one, deliberately torturing a defenseless woman because his twisted pride demands it. This is the crucial test of Duncan's character. He knows Aerion is a prince of the blood. He knows that touching a member of the royal family could mean death or mutilation. But he also knows what Ser Arlan taught him about defending the innocent. Duncan doesn't hesitate. He grabs Aerion and punches him so hard the prince goes down, then kicks him twice more, knocking out several of his teeth. It's brutal, visceral, and completely justified, but it's also potentially a death sentence. The scene must show both the horror of Aerion's cruelty and the courage of Duncan's response. We need to see Tanselle's terror and pain, Aerion's sadistic pleasure, and Duncan's moral fury overcoming his survival instinct. HBO absolutely cannot soften this scene. Aerion must be portrayed as genuinely monstrous, not just arrogant or mean-spirited. His willingness to torture an innocent woman over imagined insults to dragonkind reveals the dangerous madness that will eventually lead him to drink wildfire, believing it will transform him into a dragon. Duncan's assault on Aerion must feel desperate and righteous, a man pushed beyond his limits by injustice. This is the moment that sets everything else in motion, and it establishes Duncan as someone who truly embodies the ideals of knighthood even when doing so threatens his life. The sixth scene we absolutely need is Egg's revelation of his true identity. After Duncan attacks Aerion, the prince's guards seize him and are about to beat him to death, or worse, when a small voice cuts through the chaos. Egg steps forward and commands them to release Duncan, and to everyone's shock, including Duncan's, they obey. Aerion recognizes the boy immediately, calling him brother and asking what happened to his hair. The reveal that Egg is actually Prince Aegon Targaryen, fourth son of Prince Maekar and nephew of Prince Baelor Breakspear, completely recontextualizes everything we've seen so far. Suddenly, Egg's knowledge of horses and tournaments makes sense. His educated speech, his bold manner, his mysterious appearance at the inn, all of it clicks into place. But for Duncan, this revelation feels like betrayal. The boy he thought was a street urchin or stable hand has been lying to him, and worse, Duncan now realizes he's been harboring a missing prince that the entire royal family has been searching for. This scene needs to capture Duncan's emotional whiplash. He goes from facing death to being protected by royal authority to feeling utterly fooled and angry at Egg's deception. Egg, for his part, must show both his royal authority. He does command those guards with natural expectation of obedience, and his genuine distress at seeing Duncan hurt. The relationship between them hangs in the balance. Duncan feels used, but he also sees that Egg is terrified for him, that the boy genuinely cares about what happens to this Hedge Knight who showed him simple kindness. HBO needs to play this moment with real emotional weight. The shock should register not just on Duncan's face, but on everyone present. Guards who were about to beat a Hedge Knight to death suddenly realize they're in the presence of a Targaryen prince. Aerion's fury at his younger brother's interference adds another layer. And most importantly, we need to see the fracture and immediate repair of Duncan and Egg's friendship. Despite his anger and feeling of betrayal, Duncan can't help but recognize that Egg just saved his life, and Egg's tears and obvious remorse begin the process of rebuilding trust between them. Lucky number 7 brings us to Prince Baelor Targaryen vouching for Duncan and their pivotal conversation in Ashford Castle. This scene introduces us to one of the most beloved figures in Westerosi history and establishes the moral framework that makes the Trial of Seven so devastating. Prince Baelor, called Baelor Breakspear after his legendary victory over Demon Blackfyre in a tournament, is everything a prince should be: wise, just, merciful, and honorable. When Duncan is brought before the judges, Prince Baelor explains the gravity of his situation. For striking a prince of the blood, Duncan faces trial where the likely punishment would be losing a hand and a foot, literally crippling him for life. But Baelor also explains Duncan's right as a knight to demand trial by combat, essentially asking Duncan if he's willing to bet his life on his skill with the sword. What makes this conversation so powerful is Baelor's obvious sympathy for Duncan's situation. Baelor understands that Duncan was defending an innocent woman from his nephew's cruelty. Baelor represents what the Targaryen dynasty could have been if things had gone differently. He's the perfect heir, a skilled warrior who values mercy over vengeance, wisdom over pride. His dark Dornish features, inherited from his mother, Queen Mariah Martell, make him look less Targaryen than his brothers, but his character is absolutely royal. When he tells Duncan that he might have done the same thing in his place, he's acknowledging that Duncan acted with honor even if the law says he must be punished. HBO has cast Bertie Carvel as Prince Baelor, and this casting is absolutely crucial. Carvel needs to convey both Baelor's authority as the crown prince and hand of the king, and his essential decency and warmth. The conversation between Baelor and Duncan must feel like two honorable men recognizing each other across the divide of their stations. Baelor sees in Duncan something genuine, a hedge knight who actually believes in the ideals of knighthood rather than using them as window dressing for ambition or cruelty. This mutual respect makes what happens later so much more heartbreaking. Scene 8 is where the stakes escalate dramatically. Prince Aerion demands a trial of 7, the first such trial in over a century. A trial by combat is one thing, finding a single champion willing to fight for or against you, but a trial of 7 requires 14 knights total, 7 on each side, invoking the power of the 7 gods to determine guilt or innocence. Aerion requests this specifically to humiliate Duncan, assuming that a lowly hedge knight with no family, no connections, and no reputation will never find 6 knights willing to risk their lives for him. This scene needs to convey the historical weight and rarity of what Aerion is demanding. As Prince Baelor explains, this form of trial came from the Andals, and their belief that honoring all 7 gods would make divine intervention more likely. The last trial of 7 was King Maegor the Cruel's brutal combat against the warrior's sons, where Maegor alone survived out of all 14 participants. This is ancient, sacred, and terrifyingly dangerous. What makes this scene so tense is Duncan's growing realization of how impossible his situation has become. Not only must he find 6 knights willing to fight, but they must be actual knights, not just skilled fighters. Each one must be willing to face 3 Kingsguard, Prince Maekar, one of the best warriors in the realm, and Aerion and his brother Daeron. The odds seem insurmountable. If Duncan fails to find 6 champions, he's automatically judged guilty and will lose his hand and foot. If he does find 6 champions, they'll all likely die trying to defend a nobody hedge knight. HBO must show Duncan's desperate calculation in this moment. He has no brothers, no family connections, no old companions from previous battles. He's alone, except for a squire who is a prince and therefore cannot fight, and a kingdom full of knights who have no reason to die for him. The scene should end with Duncan facing this seemingly impossible task, the camera pulling back to show him small and isolated in the great hall of Ashford Castle, surrounded by nobles who see him as nothing but an upstart who dared to strike royal blood. Our 9th essential scene is the assembly of Duncan's champions and Prince Baelor's stunning decision to fight as Duncan's 7th. This sequence is pure emotional catharsis and shows us why these stories have resonated with readers for decades. Duncan, desperate and with time running out, manages to find allies through a combination of honor, luck, and the goodness that others see in him despite his lack of status. First comes Sir Raymond Fosselway, the friendly squire Duncan shared wine with, who convinces his cousin Sir Stefan to help, but Stefan betrays them when Prince Maekar offers him a lordship for fighting on the accuser's side. In response, Raymond demands to be knighted so he can take his cousin's place, and Sir Lionel Baratheon, called the Laughing Storm, performs the ceremony. Lionel himself joins Duncan's cause, drawn by the chance to fight in a historic trial of 7 and perhaps to test himself against the Kingsguard. Egg, using his royal connections despite his father's fury, recruits Sir Robin Riceling, a knight eager for glory. Sir Humphrey Harding and Sir Humphrey Beesbury join because Prince Aerion wronged Harding during the tourney, deliberately killing his horse in an act of pointless cruelty. These men fight not because Duncan is their friend, but because they recognize that he acted honorably and that Aerion acted with vicious dishonor. But they're still one champion short. Duncan makes a desperate public plea to the assembled knights, asking if anyone remembers Ser Arlan of Pennytree, if anyone will fight for a hedge knight's honor. The silence is crushing. Then, just as Duncan is about to be declared guilty by default, A voice rings out. Prince Baelor Targaryen, the crown prince and heir to the Iron Throne, declares he will be Duncan's 7th champion. This moment must land with the full weight it deserves. HBO needs to show the absolute shock that ripples through the crowd. Baelor didn't bring armor because he never expected to fight, so he has to borrow his son Valar's armor and horse. His decision to fight is staggering. He's risking his life and potentially the stability of the kingdom for a Hedge Knight he barely knows. But Baelor sees what Aerion has done to Tanselle. He understands that Duncan defended the innocent, and he believes that a knight who remembers his vows deserves champions, even if it means the crown prince himself must take up that cause. The scene should show Duncan's overwhelming gratitude and disbelief, Egg's pride in his uncle, and the reactions of the assembled lords and knights. Some will see Baelor's choice as noble and inspiring, others will see it as recklessly endangering the succession. But everyone will understand that they're about to witness something historic. And now we come to our 10th and most crucial scene, the trial of Seven itself, which George R.R. Martin has confirmed will be episode 5, and which he called the most dramatic thing he's ever written. This is the climax of the entire novella, and HBO must deliver something absolutely spectacular. The trial begins with 14 knights facing each other across the tourney ground. 7 defenders of Duncan versus 7 accusers. Prince Baelor's strategy is brilliant but risky. He tells his champions to use tourney lances, which are longer but more fragile than the war lances their opponents will carry. The plan is to unhorse the accusers before they can close the distance and bring their more powerful weapons to bear. As the 2 lines charge toward each other, the tension must be unbearable. These aren't extras in armor. These are characters we've come to know and care about, and several of them are about to die. The combat needs to be chaotic, brutal, and deeply personal. Ser Arlan, the drunken, Egg's eldest brother, deliberately falls from his horse in the first pass, keeping his secret promise to Duncan to withdraw his accusation. But Aerion fights viciously, unhorsing Duncan. On the ground, without horses, Duncan's size and strength become advantages. He spent his life doing hard labor and surviving in Flea Bottom, while Aerion has lived in pampered luxury. Despite Aerion's skill with weapons, Duncan overpowers him in single combat, grabbing him in a grapple and choking him until the prince yields and withdraws his accusation. But the victory comes at a terrible cost. During the melee, Prince Maekar's mace strikes someone's helmet with tremendous force. When that knight's helmet comes off, we see it's Prince Baelor, and the back of his skull has been crushed. The description in the book is horrific. Something red and wet falls out of the helmet, and Baelor touches the back of his head lightly before collapsing. Duncan catches him, desperately trying to get him to stand up like he did with his horse Thunder during the earlier tourney, but the prince doesn't rise. HBO must not shy away from the horror of this moment. Baelor Breakspear, the perfect prince who embodied everything noble about House Targaryen, dies because he chose to defend a Hedge Knight's honor. The Humphreys, both Harding and Beesbury, also die from their wounds. Duncan is technically victorious, cleared of all charges, but the price is devastating. Baelor's son Valar confronts Duncan at the funeral, telling him that Baelor could have been the greatest king since Aegon the Dragon, and demanding to know why the gods took Baelor and left Duncan alive. This scene needs to show Duncan's crushing guilt. His realization that his moment of heroism in defending Tanselle has led to the death of one of the best men in Westeros. It must show Prince Maekar's horror at realizing he killed his own brother, the beginning of the bitter regret that will haunt him for the rest of his life. And it needs to show the historical consequences. Baelor's death will lead to political instability, multiple Blackfire rebellions, and a series of weak or short-lived Targaryen kings. The Trial of Seven is the emotional and thematic heart of the Hedge Knight. It proves that Duncan is willing to die for his ideals, that he inspires others to heroism, and that he truly is a knight regardless of whether Ser Arlan formally knighted him or not. But it also demonstrates the cruel randomness of fate and the way good intentions can lead to tragic consequences. Baelor dies not because he was wrong to fight for Duncan, but because even the most righteous causes can end in sorrow. Before we wrap up, there are several other moments that HBO would be wise to include to fully flesh out this story. Duncan selling his horse and armor to commission proper tournament gear from Steely Pate establishes his humble status. The scene where Duncan watches the tourney from the common folks section with Egg on his shoulders shows their developing bond. Prince Daeron's drunken encounter with Duncan at the inn, where he cries out, "I dreamed of you," foreshadows Daeron's dragon dreams and adds an eerie supernatural element. The moment where Duncan receives his newly painted shield from Steelypate after Tanselle has fled to Dorne, and the common folk cheer him as a knight who remembered his vows, shows how Duncan's actions have inspired people despite his low birth. The final scene between Duncan and Prince Maekar, where Maekar offers Duncan a position, training Egg at court, but Duncan instead asks permission to continue wandering as a Hedge Knight with Egg as his squire, establishes the pattern that will define their relationship for years to come. Duncan believes that Egg needs to see the real Westeros to understand the common people and experience hardship in order to become a good king someday. These 10 scenes form the backbone of what makes the Hedge Knight such a beloved story. They establish Duncan's essential decency, show us the beginning of his legendary friendship with Egg, introduce us to the nobility and tragedy of Prince Baelor, and demonstrate how a simple Hedge Knight's moment of courage can have consequences that ripple through history. HBO has assembled a talented cast and creative team, and the source material is absolutely fantastic. If they can deliver these scenes with the emotional honesty and visual grandeur they deserve, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will stand as one of the best adaptations in the entire Game of Thrones franchise. The beauty of this story is that it works on multiple levels. On the surface, it's an exciting adventure about a tourney and a trial by combat. But underneath, it's a meditation on honor, class, justice, and the gap between knightly ideals and harsh reality. Duncan is neither a perfect hero nor a naive fool. He's a good man trying to do the right thing in a world where doing the right thing often leads to tragedy. That's what makes these scenes essential. They show us who Duncan really is and why his story matters. What scenes are you most excited to see in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? Do you think HBO will handle the Trial of Seven with the emotional weight it deserves? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, smash that like button and subscribe for more analysis of George R.R. Martin's incredible world. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, all men are fools and all men are knights. Until next time.